My stepmom manipulated Dad's will, and she tried to claim everything. But I found a hidden clause. I never expected to be sitting in that stuffy conference room, my heart racing, as I faced the reality of my father's death. The air was thick with unspoken words, and the weight of grief pressed down on me like a heavy blanket. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment the lawyer revealed a new will, one that completely upended everything I thought I knew about my father's wishes. As the lawyer read the terms, I felt my stomach drop. My stepmother, Elaine, was named the primary beneficiary, receiving not only the family business, but also the house where I had grown up. I glanced around the room, searching for familiar faces, but all I saw were blank stares and barely concealed smirks. It felt like a betrayal, a stab in the back from the person I had once considered family. Elaine's smile was almost predatory as she leaned back in her chair, soaking in the shock that rippled through the room. I could hardly process what I was hearing, my mind racing through memories of my father's stories about his dreams for the business and his hopes for me. How could he have changed his mind so drastically? I could feel anger bubbling beneath my grief, igniting a spark of suspicion that something was very wrong. As the reading concluded, I felt the eyes of my family on me, a mixture of pity and curiosity. They were all too quick to congratulate Elaine, their voices a chorus of hollow congratulations that made my skin crawl. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but instead, I sat there in stunned silence, feeling more isolated than ever. The room felt like a prison, and I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. After the meeting, I found myself outside the building, the cool air a sharp contrast to the suffocating atmosphere inside. My phone buzzed with a text from Elaine, a simple message that read, "We need to talk about your father's wishes." My heart raced. It felt more like a threat than a suggestion. I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something, that this was all part of a larger scheme. That evening, I pored over old family photos and documents, trying to piece together a timeline of my father's intentions. I had always known him to be a man of principle, one who valued family above all else. The thought of him suddenly abandoning those values felt impossible. But the new will contradicted everything I believed about him, and I needed to know why. In my search, I stumbled upon a letter tucked away in a dusty box, addressed to me in my father's handwriting. My heart raced as I unfolded it, but my excitement quickly turned to confusion. The letter spoke of his hopes for the business, of his desire for me to take the reins one day, but it ended abruptly, as if he had been interrupted. I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this story than met the eye. I decided to reach out to my father's old lawyer, Mr. Thompson, who had handled the family business for years. I remembered the way he had always treated me with respect, like I was part of the family. Maybe he could shed some light on the situation. I dialed his number, my hands trembling, hoping he could provide clarity amidst the chaos. Mr. Thompson answered on the second ring, his voice a familiar anchor amidst the storm. "Is this about your father?" he asked, his tone shifting to something more somber. I felt a knot in my stomach as I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. It was as if he already knew the weight of my questions, and I could hear the caution in his voice as he urged me to come in for a meeting. I arrived at his office later that afternoon, the air thick with the scent of old books and polished wood. Mr. Thompson sat behind his desk, his brow furrowed, and I could see the way his fingers drummed nervously on the surface. I took a seat across from him, my heart racing as I prepared to unravel the truth. "I've been looking over your father's will, and there are some things that don't quite add up," he said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made me shiver. As he spoke, I learned that the will had been updated shortly before my father's passing. The new provisions, which favored my stepmother so heavily, seemed to come out of nowhere. Mr. Thompson's hesitation was palpable, and I could sense that he was treading carefully, as if afraid of what might spill out. My mind raced with questions. Had my father truly changed his mind? Or had someone coerced him into it? I pressed him for details, and he mentioned that my father had expressed concerns about certain individuals, specifically about my stepmother's influence. My heart sank. Could she have manipulated him? I remembered the late-night conversations I'd overheard, the way she would sweet-talk him, always steering the discussions back to her needs. It was all starting to feel like a twisted game. Mr. Thompson shifted in his seat, leaning closer as he whispered, "I can't say much without risking my position, but I think you should look into the signatures on that will. There are legal standards for these documents, and they must be consistent. If something feels off, it probably is." His words ignited a fire within me. I was determined to find the truth, even if it meant digging through the rubble of my father's last wishes. As I left his office, a sense of urgency washed over me. I needed to gather evidence, but I also had to be careful. My stepmother had a way of manipulating those around her, and I could feel her eyes watching me, even from a distance. I decided to visit the local records office the next day, hoping to compare the signatures on the new will with those from previous documents. I needed proof, something concrete to hold on to as the walls around me seemed to close in. Back at home, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. My stepmother was acting differently, almost too friendly, as if she sensed my growing suspicions. She would bring me tea, ask about my day, and offer unsolicited advice on how to cope with my father's passing. I forced a smile each time, but inside, I was bracing myself for the storm that was surely coming. I felt like a chess piece being maneuvered across a board, and I was determined not to be sacrificed. The next morning, I arrived at the records office early, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I navigated through rows of documents, searching for my father's previous will. My heart raced as I finally found it tucked away in a dusty folder. I pulled it out, my fingers trembling as I compared the signatures. The differences were subtle but glaring. The slant of the letters, the pressure applied to the pen, everything felt wrong. As I stared at the documents, I felt a mix of anger and sadness. How could my father have been so easily swayed? Or had he truly changed his mind? The thought that someone had manipulated him into this new will felt like a betrayal that cut deeper than I could articulate. I was determined to confront my stepmother, but I knew I had to tread carefully. The last thing I wanted was to alert her to my investigation. I decided to call an old family friend, someone who had known my father for years. Lucy had always been like a second mother to me, and I hoped she could shed some light on my father's intentions. When I reached her, her voice was warm but cautious. "I heard about your father, sweetheart. It's a terrible loss. But I must warn you, there are things you might not know." My heart raced as I leaned in, desperate for answers. Lucy spoke about my father's past struggles, particularly with my stepmother's influence. "He loved you, you know. He always wanted the best for you. But he felt trapped sometimes, especially when it came to decisions about the business. I think he might have been trying to protect you in his own way." Her words felt like a lifeline, but they also deepened my resolve. I needed to uncover the truth, not just for myself, but for my father's legacy. As I hung up, I realized I was no longer just a grieving daughter. I was a detective in a twisted family drama. I felt the weight of my father's love pressing down on me, urging me to fight for what was right. I couldn't let my stepmother's manipulation stand. I had to gather more evidence, and soon. The clock was ticking, and I could feel the tension building around me, a storm brewing just out of sight. The next morning, I found myself staring at my father's old leather briefcase, a relic of his life before the chaos. I could almost hear his voice echoing in my mind, urging me to dig deeper. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I might uncover. I had to know the truth, and I needed to start somewhere. I decided to pay a visit to my father's old lawyer, Mr. Harris, a stoic man who had been with our family for decades. The thought of confronting him filled me with both dread and determination. I remembered how he had looked at me during the will reading, his eyes filled with an unreadable emotion. Maybe he knew more than he let on. As I drove to his office, I replayed the events of the will reading in my head, searching for clues. The way my stepmother had smiled when she unveiled that new will still made my skin crawl. It was as if she was waiting for me to crumble, to accept defeat. But I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. When I entered Mr. Harris's office, the familiar scent of old books and polished would welcome me. He looked up from his desk, surprise flickering across his face. "I didn't expect to see you so soon," he said, his tone neutral but his eyes wary. I took a seat, my heart racing as I prepared to ask the questions that had been gnawing at me. I started with the basics, asking about the new will and the changes my stepmother had made. Mr. Harris listened intently, his brow furrowing as I spoke. "Your father was very clear about his wishes," he said slowly, as if choosing his words carefully. "He wanted to ensure you were taken care of, but—" His voice trailed off, and I could sense a storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. I pressed him, asking if he had any concerns about the validity of the new document. He hesitated, glancing at the framed pictures of my father on his desk. "There are always nuances in family matters, especially when emotions run high," he finally replied, avoiding my gaze. It was a warning wrapped in ambiguity, and I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Before I left, I noticed a stack of papers on his desk that looked familiar. They were the old drafts of my father's will. My heart raced as I asked if I could take a look. Mr. Harris reluctantly nodded, and I felt a surge of hope. Maybe this was the lead I needed to unravel the truth. Back home, I spread the documents out on my dining table, poring over every word. As I compared the signatures, something struck me as odd. The dates on the new will didn't align with my father's known schedule. He had been out of town when it was supposedly signed. My pulse quickened as I began to connect the dots. Was it possible my stepmother had forged his signature? With each passing hour, the pieces began to fit together, but I knew I needed more than just speculation. I reached out to an old family friend, someone who had known my father for years. I hoped they could shed light on any changes he had hinted at before his passing. The more I gathered, the clearer the picture became. When I finally spoke to her, she seemed hesitant at first, but my urgency must have broken through her defenses. "Your father was always protective of you, you know," she said, her voice tinged with sadness. "He mentioned wanting to ensure you were secure, especially after your mother passed. He didn't trust many people, especially not." She paused, and I felt my heart race as I urged her to continue. "Especially not your stepmother," she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. My stomach dropped as I realized the implications. Had my father suspected her manipulation even before his death? It was a revelation that sent chills down my spine. I needed to confront my stepmother with this new knowledge, but I also needed to be careful. She was a master manipulator. That evening, I sat alone in my living room, the weight of my discoveries pressing down on me. I had to be strategic about my next steps. Confronting my stepmother without solid proof could backfire, and I knew I had to play this game wisely. My father's legacy depended on it. As I drifted into sleep, I dreamed of my father, his reassuring smile fading into a frown as he looked at me, warning me of the dangers ahead. I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. I wouldn't let his love be overshadowed by deceit. I had to dig deeper to find the hidden truths that could turn the tide in my favor. The next day, I made a plan to gather more evidence, hoping to find anything that could support my case. I started by reaching out to a few of my father's old colleagues, hoping they might have insights into his intentions. I knew that the more I could uncover, the stronger my position would be when I finally confronted my stepmother. Every conversation felt like a delicate dance, each word chosen carefully as I navigated through a web of half-truths and hidden agendas. I felt like I was peeling back layers of a complex onion, each layer revealing more about my father's life and the people who surrounded him. The closer I got to the truth, the more I realized how deeply my stepmother had woven herself into the fabric of our family's narrative. I could feel the tension building, not just within myself, but in the atmosphere around me. It was as if everyone sensed the impending storm, but no one dared to speak up. I was determined to be the one to break the silence, to expose the manipulation lurking beneath the surface. My father's legacy deserved to be honored, not twisted into a tool for greed. The day after the family gathering felt like a fog had settled over my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in and I was losing my grip on the truth. I spent the night replaying every moment, every conversation, searching for clues that might help me piece together the real story behind my father's will. Something was definitely off, and I was determined to get to the bottom of it. I decided to reach out to my father's old lawyer, Harold, who had been a family friend for decades. His voice was gravelly over the phone, but there was a warmth in it that I remembered fondly. When I mentioned the will, I could hear the shift in his tone, a subtle tension that hinted at something more than just legal matters. "Why don't you come by the office?" "There are some things we need to discuss," he said, and my heart raced with anticipation. Arriving at Harold's office, I felt a mix of dread and hope. The shelves were lined with dusty books, and the air was thick with the scent of aged paper. He gestured for me to sit down, and I wasted no time diving into my concerns about the will. As I spoke, I noticed a flicker of hesitation in his eyes, a momentary lapse that made me wonder if he was holding back information. "Your father had a unique way of doing things," he finally said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Sometimes, he didn't always follow the conventional route." I pressed him for more details, my curiosity now an insatiable beast. Harold shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and I could tell he was weighing his words carefully. "There were adjustments made over the years," he finally admitted. "Your father had his reasons, but some of those changes were not documented properly." My stomach dropped. Could my stepmother have had a hand in this? Was she manipulating not just the will, but the entire narrative of my father's intentions? With a new sense of urgency, I left Harold's office, my mind racing. I needed proof, something concrete to back up my suspicions. As I walked through the familiar streets of my childhood, I couldn't help but feel like I was walking through a maze of lies. I decided to revisit the old family archives in my father's study, hoping to uncover anything that might hint at his true wishes. Maybe I could find some documents that would contradict the new will. Back at the house, I rifled through old boxes filled with photographs and letters, memories that felt bittersweet. I stumbled upon a folder labeled Important Documents tucked away in a dusty corner. My heart raced as I opened it, revealing old drafts of my father's will and notes in his handwriting. I felt like I was holding a treasure map, but as I compared the signatures and dates, unease crept in. The inconsistencies were glaring. Some signatures looked off, almost like they were forged. As I pieced together the documents, a thought struck me like a lightning bolt. What if my stepmother had not only manipulated the will, but had also altered previous documents? It was a chilling realization, and I felt the weight of it settle heavily on my chest. I knew I had to confront her, but the thought of doing so without solid proof left me feeling vulnerable. I needed to gather more evidence before I could even think about exposing her. Days turned into a blur as I meticulously collected every scrap of information I could find. I reached out to old family friends, hoping they could shed light on my father's intentions. One evening, I met with Clara, a woman who had known my father since childhood. Her eyes sparkled with nostalgia, but as I shared my concerns, they clouded with worry. "Your father was a man of principle," she said slowly. "He would never have wanted this. But I did hear whispers about your stepmother's influence." Clara leaned in closer, her voice barely above a whisper. "There was a time when your father mentioned wanting to ensure you were taken care of, even if he wasn't around. But he also had his secrets." My heart raced as I processed her words. What secrets? I needed to dig deeper, but Clara's vague hints left me more confused than ever. It was becoming increasingly clear that my stepmother had woven a web of deceit that was growing more tangled by the day. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed Clara's words over and over in my mind, desperately trying to connect the dots. My phone buzzed beside me, a text from my stepmother asking if we could meet for coffee. I hesitated, feeling a mix of dread and determination. This could be my chance to confront her, to see if I could catch her off guard. I typed a quick response, agreeing to meet the next day, my heart pounding at the thought of what might unfold. As I prepared for the meeting, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into a trap. I needed to be strategic, to listen carefully and observe her behavior. When I arrived at the cafe, the air was thick with tension. My stepmother greeted me with a forced smile, but I could see the flicker of unease in her eyes. I decided to start casually, discussing mundane topics, but I could feel the underlying current of manipulation flowing between us. Eventually, I steered the conversation toward my father, watching her reaction closely. "I've been thinking a lot about the will lately," I said, gauging her response. Her smile faltered for just a moment, and I seized the opportunity. It's hard to believe he would change his mind so drastically, especially after all he'd done for me. I watched as her expression shifted, the mask slipping just enough for me to see the truth lurking beneath. She recovered quickly, her voice smooth but her eyes betraying her anxiety. "Your father always had his reasons, dear. Change is a part of life." But her words felt hollow, and I knew I had to press further. "Did he ever talk to you about his intentions? I just want to understand what he wanted from me." I watched as she struggled to maintain her composure, the cracks in her facade widening. The pressure was rising, and I could feel the walls closing in around her. I had to act fast before she could regroup. "I found some old documents that don't match the will you presented," I said, my voice steady but my heart racing. Her eyes widened, and for a brief moment, I saw genuine fear flash across her face. This was it. I was inching closer to the truth, and I could feel the stakes escalating. But I knew I needed more than just a confrontation. I needed irrefutable proof to bring her down. As I left the cafe, I felt a mixture of adrenaline and dread coursing through me. I was getting closer to the truth, but I knew the fight was far from over. My stepmother was a master manipulator, and I had to be cautious. I was determined to protect my father's legacy, but the road ahead was fraught with danger. I had to gather more evidence, connect the final dots, and prepare for the confrontation that was inevitable. As I sat in my car, the weight of the last few days pressed down on me like a heavy fog. My heart raced with the knowledge that my stepmother was not just a grieving widow. She was a cunning strategist, playing her cards close to her chest. I had to think several steps ahead to outmaneuver her. I opened my laptop and stared at the documents I had gathered, each one a piece of a puzzle that was starting to form in my mind. I decided to revisit the old family lawyer, Mr. Harris, who had worked with my father for decades. His office was cluttered, filled with the scent of old paper and ink, but the moment I mentioned the will, his expression shifted. It was subtle, but I caught it, an almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. I pressed him for more details about my father's intentions, but he was evasive, offering only vague reassurances that everything was as it should be. That evening, I pored over the documents again, scrutinizing every signature and date. The more I looked, the more inconsistencies I found. The new will was dated just a month before my father's death, but it felt rushed, almost frantic. My father was meticulous. He would never have left something so important to chance. I made a mental note to ask Mr. Harris about the timeline during our next meeting. I reached out to my father's old friends, hoping one of them might have insights into his state of mind before his passing. One friend, Alice, agreed to meet me at a small diner on the outskirts of town. As we sat across from each other, her eyes filled with concern. "Your father was worried about something, but he never told me what it was. He mentioned needing to update his will, but I didn't think much of it at the time," she confessed, her voice trembling slightly. Alice's words sent a chill down my spine. What had he been worried about? I asked her if he had ever mentioned my stepmother in a negative light, and her expression darkened. He didn't trust her completely. He thought she was too ambitious, too eager to take control. But he loved her, you know? "It was complicated," she replied, leaving me with more questions than answers. Back at home, I couldn't shake Alice's revelation. I knew I had to act quickly. I began drafting a list of questions for Mr. Harris, focusing on my father's intentions and the circumstances surrounding the new will. The more I pieced together, the clearer it became that my stepmother had orchestrated this entire situation. It was time to take a stand, but I needed more evidence before making any bold moves. The next day, I returned to Mr. Harris's office, armed with my list. He was surprisingly receptive, and as I presented my questions, I noticed the way his eyes flickered with concern. "Your father was a good man, but he was also vulnerable. He was under a lot of pressure in the months leading up to his death," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. My heart sank. What kind of pressure? I pressed him further, and he reluctantly revealed that my father had mentioned a potential threat to his estate. He didn't specify, but I could tell he was worried about someone taking advantage of him, Mr. Harris said, his brow furrowed. My stepmother's face flashed in my mind, and I felt a surge of anger. This wasn't just about money. It was about my father's legacy and the trust he had placed in the wrong person. Feeling the walls closing in, I decided to gather more evidence. I reached out to a few family members who had been close to my father, hoping to find allies. To my surprise, they were hesitant to talk, echoing my stepmother's narrative that I was being unreasonable. It was as if she had spun a web around them. and I was the fly caught in the middle. Frustrated, I took a different approach. I began documenting everything: conversations, timelines, and inconsistencies in the will. I even went so far as to look into my stepmother's past, searching for any signs of manipulation. It felt like I was diving into a dark abyss, but I couldn't stop now. The stakes were too high. Then, a breakthrough came when I found an old family video tucked away in a box of my father's belongings. It was grainy, but the image of him smiling brought tears to my eyes. As I watched, he spoke directly to me, his voice warm and reassuring. He mentioned wanting to protect his family and his legacy, and in that moment, I knew I had to fight for what was right. There had to be a way to prove my stepmother's deception. With renewed determination, I began reaching out to my father's colleagues, hoping they could provide insights into his mindset. Each conversation felt like pulling at a thread, unraveling a deeper story of my father's fears and doubts. I couldn't let my stepmother manipulate this narrative any longer. I needed to expose the truth before it was too late. As the days passed, I felt the tension mounting. I was running out of time, and the more I uncovered, the more isolated I became. Family gatherings felt like minefields, with my stepmother skillfully deflecting any suspicion while I quietly gathered my evidence. I was preparing for the inevitable confrontation, but each day brought new challenges and obstacles. I realized I needed to confront my stepmother directly, but I had to be strategic. I couldn't let her see my cards too soon. I began plotting my approach, carefully planning how to present my findings in a way that would not only expose her manipulation, but also rally the family to my side. It was a delicate balance, and I knew I had to tread carefully. The tension in the air was palpable as I sat in my childhood home, surrounded by family members who were blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. I had spent the last few days meticulously gathering evidence, poring over old documents, and talking to anyone who might provide insight into my father's true intentions. My heart raced with anticipation and dread. I was on the verge of exposing a betrayal that had shattered my world. But before I could confront my stepmother, I needed to ensure that I had every piece of the puzzle firmly in place. I decided to reach out to my father's old lawyer again, a man named Harold who had known my father for decades. The last time we spoke, he had hinted the possibility of manipulation regarding the will, but he hadn't provided any concrete details. I needed to approach him carefully, not wanting to raise any red flags that might alert my stepmother. After a few texts, we arranged to meet at a cafe a few blocks away from the family home, a neutral ground where we could talk without fear of eavesdropping. As I walked into the cafe, the smell of freshly brewed coffee mixed with the soft hum of chatter enveloped me. I spotted Harold in a corner booth, his face lined with age and wisdom, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of concern when he saw me. I took a seat across from him and wasted no time, diving straight into my suspicions about the will. Harold, I need your help. I believe something isn't right with my father's will. My stepmother, she's been acting strangely ever since his passing. Harold leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Your father was a complex man, and he had a deep sense of family loyalty. If you suspect manipulation, you may be onto something. I can't say much, but there were discussions about a hidden clause in the original will. My heart raced at the mention of a hidden clause. This was the breakthrough I had been searching for, but I needed more than just a hint. I needed proof. After our meeting, I felt a surge of determination. I spent the next few days revisiting the documents I had collected, focusing on the will's signatures and dates. There was something unsettling about the way my stepmother had presented the new will, and I could feel the discrepancies lurking just beneath the surface. Late one night, as I compared the signatures, I noticed it. My father's signature on the new will was noticeably different from those on other documents. My gut twisted. This was no coincidence. With my heart pounding, I decided to reach out to a family friend, someone who had known my father well. Ellen had been a confidant to my father, and I hoped she could shed light on his intentions. I arranged to meet her at her favorite park, a serene place where we could talk without the prying eyes of family. When I arrived, she greeted me with a warm hug, but I could see the worry etched on her face. What's going on, sweetheart? She asked, her tone immediately shifting to concern. I took a deep breath and explained everything. The sudden will change, my stepmother's manipulation, and the inconsistencies I had found. Ellen listened intently, her brow furrowing as I spoke. Your father was always careful with his affairs. He had a way of ensuring his wishes were honored, even if it meant keeping secrets, she said, her voice heavy with the weight of the past. I remember him mentioning a video message he recorded for you before he passed. He wanted you to know how much he loved you and his true wishes. My heart raced at the thought of a video, a final message that could clarify everything. Ellen promised to help me track down the video, and I felt a glimmer of hope. But as I left the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out. My stepmother was becoming increasingly hostile, and I could see her influence spreading through the family. I needed to act fast, not just for myself, but for my father's legacy. I decided to test the waters with my siblings, subtly probing their thoughts about the will and my stepmother's role in it. During a family dinner, I carefully brought up the topic, framing it as a casual conversation. Have you guys thought about how Dad would have wanted things after he was gone? I asked, try to gauge their reactions. My brother shrugged, while my sister looked uneasy. I trust what Mom has done, she said, her voice tinged with uncertainty. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I needed to turn this uncertainty into action. If I could get them to question my stepmother's decisions, it might shift the tide in my favor. After dinner, I found a moment alone with my sister. I've been thinking about the will and how it feels off. Don't you find it strange that Dad would change everything so suddenly? I pressed, watching her face for signs of doubt. Her expression shifted, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. I guess it is a bit odd, she finally admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. It was a small victory, but it felt like a crack in the facade my stepmother had built. As the days passed, I grew more anxious. I was on the brink of exposing the truth, but I needed that video message to solidify my case. Ellen was working on tracking it down, but I couldn't afford to wait. I decided to confront my stepmother one last time, armed with the evidence I'd gathered. I needed to see how she would react when pressed, hoping to catch her off guard and reveal her true nature. I arranged a meeting under the guise of wanting to discuss the family estate. My stepmother agreed, her confidence radiating as she sat across from me. I started with small talk, but my heart raced as I transitioned to the will. I've been thinking a lot about Dad's wishes, and I wonder if he would have approved of the changes made to the will, I said, watching her closely. Her smile faltered for a brief moment, but she quickly recovered, her eyes narrowing. Your father made those decisions clear to me, she replied, her voice steely. You need to trust that I have your best interests at heart. I could feel the tension in the room thickening, but I pressed on. What if I told you that there are discrepancies in the signatures, and that there might be a video of Dad explaining his true wishes? The moment those words left my lips, I saw her mask slip just a fraction. It was a fleeting moment, but it was enough to ignite a fire in me. I was ready to take this fight public, to expose her manipulation once and for all. The air in the room crackled with unspoken tension, and I could see the flicker of doubt in my stepmom's eyes. She had always prided herself on her composure, but now, the slightest crack in her facade made my heart race. I was standing at the edge of a precipice, ready to leap into the unknown. My father's legacy was at stake, and I was determined to uncover the truth no matter the cost. After our confrontation, I spent sleepless nights combing through old family documents and records. The inconsistencies in the signatures haunted me. They felt like puzzle pieces that didn't fit. I needed a plan, a way to present my findings without giving her a chance to manipulate the narrative further. I reached out to my father's old lawyer, hoping he would have the final piece of the puzzle. When I met with him, the atmosphere was heavy with unsaid words. He looked older than I remembered, his eyes clouded with the weight of his own memories. Your father was a complicated man, he began, his voice barely above a whisper. He often felt trapped by the expectations placed upon him, especially in his later years. I leaned in closer, sensing there was more he wanted to say. The lawyer hesitated, as if weighing the risks of what he was about to reveal. There were whispers about a video message, something he recorded for you, he finally admitted. My heart skipped a beat. Could it be that my father had foreseen the betrayal and left behind a safeguard? I needed to find that video. It could be the evidence I desperately sought. As I left the lawyer's office, a sense of urgency surged within me. I rushed home, rifling through old boxes filled with my father's belongings, hoping to find any clue that would lead me to the video. Each item felt like a relic of a past I was trying to reclaim, a connection to a father who had been taken from me too soon. I could feel my determination hardening. I would not let my stepmom erase his wishes. Days turned into a blur of searching and questioning. I reached out to my father's closest friends, hoping they might have insights into where he kept important things. One evening, I found myself sitting across from an old family friend, Margaret, who had known my father since childhood. Her eyes glistened with a mix of nostalgia and sorrow as she recounted stories of my father's dreams and aspirations. As she spoke, I noticed her expression shift when I mentioned the will. He never wanted anyone to take advantage of him, she said, her voice trembling slightly. He always believed in fairness and transparency, especially with family. Her words were a stark reminder of what was at stake. I pressed her for more, and she revealed a detail that made my heart race. My father had once mentioned a hidden clause that he wanted to ensure was honored. The revelation sent me spiraling into a whirlwind of emotions. Could it be that my stepmom had not only manipulated the will, but had also overlooked a crucial detail that could expose her lies? I needed to confront her with this information, but I had to tread carefully. If she caught wind of my investigation, I feared she would do anything to cover her tracks. In the days that followed, I gathered my evidence meticulously, piecing together a case that would leave no room for her to wiggle out. I contacted the lawyer again, seeking his advice on how to present my findings. You need to be strategic, he cautioned. Prepare for her to be defensive. She will try to turn the family against you. I took his words to heart, fortifying myself for the battle ahead. With each passing day, the weight of the confrontation loomed larger. I could almost feel the energy shift in the family gatherings. Whispers and glances were exchanged behind closed doors. My stepmom had begun to turn family members against me, planting seeds of doubt about my motives. It was a desperate tactic, but it only fueled my resolve to bring the truth to light. The day of the family gathering arrived, and I felt a mix of anxiety and determination as I prepared to unveil my findings. I had spoken to several family members, sharing snippets of what I had discovered, and their reactions had ranged from concern to disbelief. I knew I had to present my case clearly and compellingly. This was my moment to reclaim my father's legacy and expose the truth. As I walked into the room filled with family, the air was thick with anticipation. I could see my stepmom, her smile tight and forced, as if she could sense the storm brewing. I took a deep breath, grounding myself in the knowledge that I was armed with the truth. It was time to unveil the hidden clause and the video to show everyone the father I knew and the wishes he had made clear. But just as I was about to speak, a family member stood up, looking directly at me with a mix of pity and confusion. "Are you sure you want to do this?" they asked, their voice wavering. It was a moment of hesitation, and I could see my stepmom's eyes narrowing in triumph. I had to press forward to reclaim my narrative before it slipped away. With renewed resolve, I began to outline the discrepancies in the will, detailing the signatures and the dates that didn't align. I felt the eyes of my family on me, some filled with skepticism, others with growing curiosity. My father believed in transparency. I declare, my voice steady. He would never have wanted this manipulation to stand. The room fell silent, and I could feel the weight of my words hanging in the air. Just as I was about to reveal the hidden clause, my stepmom interjected, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're just trying to create drama, aren't you? You're tarnishing your father's memory with these wild accusations." But I could see the cracks in her armor. Her voice wavered slightly, and for the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps the truth would finally break through her facade. As I prepared to pull out the evidence, my heart raced. I could feel the tide shifting, the energy in the room turning. I needed to show them the video. It was my trump card, the final nail in her coffin. But I also knew that I had to be strategic about how I presented it, making sure that every word counted. The stakes were higher than ever, and I was ready to expose the truth once and for all. I stepped forward, heart pounding, and clicked play on the video. My father's voice filled the room, steady and warm, cutting through the tension like a knife. If you're watching this, it means I'm no longer with you, and I need to tell you something important. I could see the shock on my stepmother's face, her facade cracking just enough for me to catch a glimpse of her true self. The room fell silent, everyone fixated on the screen. My father continued, addressing me directly, his words laced with a sincerity that made my heart ache. I want you to know that I've always believed in you, and my intention was to ensure your future was secure. The changes I made to the will were not meant to undermine you, but were based on circumstances that I now realize were manipulated. Gasps echoed around the room, and I could see my stepmother's face pale. She shifted uncomfortably, her eyes darting from me to the video. This was it, the moment I had been waiting for, the evidence that would shatter her carefully constructed lies. I could feel the weight of the family's gaze upon her, the doubts seeping into their minds like poison. As the video played on, my father's voice became a lifeline, revealing the hidden clause that had been buried in the original will. I have included a provision that ensures my wishes are honored, regardless of any changes made after my passing. My hope is that you both can find a way to work together for the sake of our family, but if not, this will stand. His words were a clear challenge to her deceit. When the video ended, the silence was deafening. I looked around the room, gauging reactions. My brother's brow was furrowed, confusion mingling with anger, while my aunt's expression was one of disbelief. I could see my stepmother's composure slipping, her carefully curated smile replaced by a grimace. The truth was out, and it was unraveling her grip on our family. My voice trembled as I addressed the room, fueled by a mix of adrenaline and righteous anger. This isn't just about money, it's about integrity. My father trusted me, and he made his intentions clear. We have a right to honor his wishes, not just for ourselves, but for his legacy. I could feel the support of my family beginning to swell, the tide turning against her. But my stepmother wasn't finished. She quickly regained her composure, a flicker of desperation in her eyes. This is just a video. You can't trust it. It's not legally binding. Her voice was rising, panic creeping in as she realized the walls were closing in around her. It was clear she was losing control, and I was ready to push further. Before I could respond, my brother stepped forward, his voice firm. "Mom, you've manipulated us for too long. We deserve the truth, and we need to respect Dad's wishes." This video changes everything. I could see the weight of his words settling over the room, and the family began to murmur in agreement, the atmosphere thick with tension and betrayal. I took a deep breath, knowing I had to keep the momentum going. We need to take legal action to restore the original will. My father's voice must be honored, and I refuse to let his memory be tarnished by deceit. I'll fight for this, for him and for us. My determination resonated with the family, a shared sense of purpose igniting in the air. My stepmother's face twisted with fury, but there was a flicker of fear behind her bravado. She could sense the shift, the loss of her power over us. "You'll regret this. You have no idea what you're getting into." Her threats fell flat, the resolve in the room solidifying against her. I could feel the eyes of my family on me, their support palpable. I turned to my brother, and for the first time in a long while, we shared a look of understanding. We were in this together, ready to confront the chaos she had unleashed. We'll hire a lawyer, gather all the evidence, and make sure Dad's true wishes are fulfilled. We owe him that much. As the conversation shifted toward the next steps, I felt a sense of clarity washing over me. The fear that had gripped me for so long was replaced by a fierce determination. I wouldn't let my father's legacy be tainted by greed and manipulation. The fight was just beginning, and I was ready to face whatever came next. In the weeks that followed, we gathered our evidence, combing through documents and reaching out to family friends who could testify to my father's intentions. The support from my family grew stronger, and with each passing day, I felt more empowered. My stepmother's influence began to wane, her isolation evident as the family rallied around the truth. Finally, the day came for the legal proceedings. As I sat in the courtroom, surrounded by family, I felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. This was it, the moment where we would finally seek justice for my father. I could see my stepmother sitting across the room, her facade crumbling, the reality of her actions catching up to her. When the judge ruled in our favor, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The original will was restored, my father's true intentions honored. I glanced at my brother, and we exchanged a smile, a silent acknowledgement of the journey we had undertaken together. The burden that had weighed on me for so long was finally lifted. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt a sense of closure. I had fought for my father, for my family, and for the truth. It was a bittersweet victory, but I knew I had done right by him. The scars of betrayal would linger, but the love and unity that emerged from this ordeal would guide us forward. Thanks so much for watching until the end. If you enjoyed our videos, please like, share, and subscribe to the llama if you want more drama. It truly means a lot.